Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll share my screen. Yeah. Good evening and welcome everyone to the second session. We'll be continuing with this book by George Ollman, Bertell Ollman, Alienation, and we'll be switching this and with basic Marxism, elementary Marxism next week. So we'll be like covering both like alternatively. Uh, yeah. Hopefully everyone will participate more as time goes on. For now, I think this session, it'll be like the three, like me, Nikhil, and Zaira, reading out the text. There are like three parts in it, and I guess we'll read out one of them, or should we like do
Yeah,
3 pages
read
each?
one, like each person read one part.
Yeah. Okay. Um. Yeah, I think we'll like don't be to everyone, don't be afraid to like give your opinions on the text because I feel like last time I was just steamrolling through the thing and like just saying what I felt and didn't really give any space for others to speak. Ha. So I think I will start now. Yeah, okay. This is the first chapter with words that appear like bats. Should I pause after every paragraph or like every page or something? Should I?
Yeah, pause after every paragraph.
Okay.
Any comment?
The most formidable hurdle facing all readers of Marx is his peculiar use of words. Wilfredo Pareto provides us with a classic statement of this problem when he asserts that Marx's words are like bats. One can see in them both birds and mice. No more profound observation has ever been offered on our subject. Thinkers through the years have noticed how hard it is to pin Marx down to particular meanings and have generally treated their non comprehension as a criticism. Yet, without a firm knowledge of what Marx is trying to convey with his terms, one cannot properly grasp any of his theories. I think I'll read the next paragraph as well, because, yeah. Um, how, for example, our, hmm, yeah,
See if
hmm,
yeah,
I didn't, yeah, okay, yeah, continue. How, for example, are we to understand the startling claim that value is labor, or Marx's assertion that the identity of consumption and production appears to be a threefold one, or his allusion to theory which, under certain circumstances, becomes a material force? Marx's statements frequently jar us, and instances of obscurity in his work, occasions where two or more interpretations seem equally applicable, are more numerous still. Okay. If anyone has anything to say on that or like explain.
Uh, I want to ask if everyone understood it,
Yeah,
so that you don't chumma talk about it.
yeah, that's a good idea. Wait,
Can
did
these
like
people respond?
in the voice chat, like
Yeah, just chat in the chat. Like just
What chat?
everyone that can just react to the message I put there. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone got that. Um,
yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I do have like a small thing to say about what he said about the threefold, uh, threefold character of things. I think, I mean, I don't know if this is applicable. The Marx often talks about like value having two characteristics, which is the exchange value and like use value, which is, exchange value being the, okay, wait, that's too much. Yeah, I'm gonna stop that there.
That's like it's just not material here because all he's saying is that Marx keeps saying things like this.
Yeah.
You know that terms can have many meanings. Here are some examples. That's what he's saying. So here's one example: value is labor. Here's another example that he thinks that theory is a material force.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I'll continue. Now,
Yeah.
Engels was well aware of the trouble people had in coming to grips with Marxist terminology. In his preface to the English edition of Capital, he says, there is, however, one difficulty we could not spare the reader: the use of certain terms in a sense different from what they have, not only in common life, but in ordinary political economy. But according to Engels, this was unavoidable. Every new aspect of a science that involves a revolution in the technical terms of that science, political economy has generally been content to take just as they were the terms of commercial and industrial life and to operate with them, entirely failing to see that by doing so, it confined itself within the narrow circle of ideas expressed by those terms. It is, however, self evident that a theory which views modern capitalist production as a mere passing stage in the economic history of mankind must make use of terms different from those habitual to writers who look upon that form of production as imperishable and final. I think we'll do the same thing after every paragraph. I'll just react to the message if you understood, or yeah. So,
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't see it.
okay.
Um, so I think just instead of asking, maybe we can just like explain and move forward, and
Mm.
just hope that if people don't understand something, they'll
Ask.
ask again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So just explain this part. Yeah,
yeah, so basically, what Engels is saying here is that, especially in science, theories and terms are constantly changing, and terms like what a term means is constantly changing. But in like when it comes to political economy and like history, also this constant changing nature of is not taken into consideration. And like if we are to take into consideration or understand the fact that capitalism is simply a stage in the history of mankind, we have to also make use of terms like in science that mean different things at different stages. That it's like he's asserting the same thing that he said earlier about how Marx's statements are have different meanings. All of that.
The basic idea here is that you can't
Can't hear you clearly, Nikhil. Can you
Can you
speak
speak
up?
louder?
Yeah.
yeah, the basic idea is that can you hear me now?
Uh, it's still very soft.
Yeah.
Uh, so the basic idea here is that
Okay. Yeah.
you can't abstract things that Marx says of what what kind of a political economy or what kind of production we're talking. So if he uses a term to describe, if he uses a term in the context of capitalism, and he uses the same term in when he's talking about future of society or anything like that, then the meaning of the term changes.
Right.
Kind of
But
like
yeah, he hasn't gotten to the part where he says that it's changed.
ah
It's true that it does change. He's saying that Marx uses very complicated words and it's not easy to grasp their meaning, but you can't do anything about it. Like, this is an unavoidable thing because we can't use terms as they're used in other, uh, disciplines. Like, he's giving the example of commercial and industrial life. So, using the same terms in the same manner would limit the meaning of what Marx has to say. And what Marx has to say is different from what other people are saying about capitalism. So he's using like different words that mean different things, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. I will be continuing. Now, whether the necessity which forced Marx to adopt this peculiar use of language is self-evident, as Engels claims, is open to question, but to question it now would be to depart from my chosen inquiry. What Engels is saying is that words express the understanding of a period, and as this understanding progresses, these words and/or their meanings must give way to new ones. To use only terms that are current or only the accepted meanings of such terms is to confine oneself to expressing ideas which are also current. In Marx's case, viewing capitalism as a passing phase is said to demand different concepts from those used by people who consider capitalism to be the eternal mode of production. I think we just talked about that.
Yeah, it's the same thing. We
Yeah,
just explained this part.
yeah. 8 years later, in his introduction to Capital, Volume 3, after a considerable volume of misinterpretation had passed under the bridge, Engels returns to this subject, mentioning yet another difficulty in Marx's use of words. It seems that Marx's terminology, besides being new and unusual, is also inconsistent and the same word meaning different things at different times. Rather than seeing this as a fault, Engels proclaims it as a virtue and says this was necessary to express Marx's understanding of the society he describes. Okay, yeah. Engels argues that we should not expect to find fixed, cut to measure, once and for all applicable definitions in Marx's works. It is self evident that where things and their interrelations are conceived not as fixed, but as changing, their mental images, the ideas, are likewise subject to change and transformation, and they aren't encapsulated in rigid definitions, but are developed in their historical or logical process of formulation. Okay. Uh, yeah, wait. Yeah, I think like idea that even though like This is what he's been like say. He's like uh, what's the word? Supplementing his argument now here because he's saying that the fact that Marx uses words that have different meanings and have changing meanings is a good thing, and because it helps us understand the way Marx thinks and how he conceptualizes the things he studies, and that is what like it says here, right? Like they are changing, they're constantly changing, and like their relations to each other are also constantly changing as a historical process.
Right. I think what's important to note here is he's saying that Marx's conception of the world is one in which everything is changing, which is why he feels the need to not have fixed definitions for things like other people's conceptions because he doesn't believe they are fixed. So, which is why they are constantly changing. I
Yeah,
hope that's clear.
I will be continuing. According to Engels, then, Marx's words are meant to express a conception of things and their interrelations, not as fixed, but as changing. And consequently, the definitions of these words must also change. It is tempting at this point to call a halt to the jargon and declare Engels and Marx with him confused and incapable of full clarification. There is a tradition in the English speaking world going at least as far back as George Bernard Shaw, which warns readers of Marx to never mind the metaphysics and blames his slight exaggerations or gaping errors, depending on the critic's political complexion, on his animistic philosophy. Another more difficult path to follow is the one which leads from Marx's terminology to the picture of the world he was trying to convey. Engels' comments have not resolved this mystery, but they point the direction in which research must proceed. In Marx's conception of social reality lies the solution to the riddle which some readers have discovered in his terminology. I think here the point he's trying to make is that like when a lot of critics of Marx have read Marx and thereby while reading Marx have applied their own um, political philosophy and ideals into the way he's written, and thereby come to the conclusion that he makes no sense or like that he's made mistakes because of the terms meaning multiple things and all of that. But in order to completely understand what Marx has said, we must first consider, as Ira mentioned earlier, like the way Marx sees the world as an ever-changing, as something that is ever-changing, and thereby we can start to understand what Marx is trying to say in his theory. I hope that's clear. Um, okay. With few exceptions, Marx's critics have avoided any serious investigation of his conception of social reality. This has not relieved them, however, of the necessity of having a position on this subject, of making an assumption about the way in which Marx views the world. Consequently, of believing, generally without ever making it explicit, that whatever he knows is of a certain character. In doing so, whether aware of it or not, they are prescribing real limits to what he could be saying. Marx's terms are forced into the mold of what they must mean given this view of the world. Consequently, to launch directly into a discussion of Marx's theories, insofar as one is not content simply to repeat his expressions, is almost invariably to adopt by default ordinary language criteria for deciding on its meaning. It is to assume that what we take to be common sense is an adequate foundation on which to build an understanding of Marx. That there is no fundamental difference between his conception of social reality and our own. Engels has already said enough to indicate the dangers in making this assumption, but I should also like to show its influence on at least one standard interpretation of Marx's theories. By this means, too, I hope to justify the amount of time devoted to epistemological inquiry in the coming chapters. Yeah, I think here he's simply saying what I think. I think I explained this. It is like the general idea until now in this chapter is the fact that you shouldn't go and apply it, like you should give Marx the benefit of the doubt and not apply your own common sense or like the way you view society and thereby try to understand what he's saying and instead try to see it how he saw it, you know. I think is who's gonna should I keep screen sharing? Is who's
Yeah,
reading the next part?
I don't know how to screen share, so
Yeah, okay, I'll keep doing it.
okay. Wait, am I the one reading?
Doesn't Nikhil wanna take this part? Oh,
Actually, I'll read it
okay.
because I don't want to read the last chapter. Okay.
Okay, fine. I'll
Wait, are you reading it? What did he say? I didn't hear him.
I think he meant he'll
no.
take the
You
last
read.
part.
I'll take the
Ah,
last
okay.
part.
Alright, alright. Also, when I'm reading, I would like that people respond. They just say yes or no when, you know, when I ask, do you get it? So that I don't have to like
Yeah,
explain and shit. Okay. Perhaps nothing Marx ever said has been more frequently echoed than the claim that the mode of production of material life determines the social, political, and intellectual life process in general. This is declared true not only of the present but across time, such that any major development in the mode of production brings about changes in these other sectors as well. So much every student of Marxism knows. The question which remains to be asked are what exactly is included in the mode of production and in what sense is it said to determine these other factors? Or we may ask, how is Marx using the expressions mode of production and determine? Okay, so he is trying, so basically in the previous chapter, he was talking about how critics are often misconstruing what Marx is saying. So he's taking an example of something that Marx has said that a lot of critics have found fault with. And he's trying to, lay down the assumptions that these critics are making. So can you scroll up?
yeah.
Yeah, so he's taking this line, the mode of production of material life determines the social, political, and intellectual life processes in general. And he's saying that in when we take this line, what the major question is what does he mean when he say mode of production? As in what is included under mode of production? And what does he mean when he says determines? Like how does mode of production influence social, political, and intellectual life? Yeah, going down. Okay. John Plamenatz offers a concise statement of the most widespread interpretation of Marx's claim, which he formulates as a series of fundamentalist assumptions. According to Plamenatz, Marx's view assumes, in the first place, that men's activities recorded by the historian have been properly classified, that they have been divided into a number of mutually exclusive classes or factors. It assumes, in the second place, that the activities called fundamental change their character more or less independently of the others. And lastly, it assumes that changes in the character of the activities called fundamental produce, directly or indirectly, corresponding changes in the characters of other activities. Okay, so he's saying, oh, Okay, he's giving an example of this dude who's um, who's basically assuming that Marx's claim, the one that we read earlier, that line about mode of production, that he's assuming that it is fundamentalist, and he's basically making three claims. That first, Marx assumes that men's activities, the ones that he mentioned earlier, like what do you call it, social, political, intellectual life, mode
Yeah.
of production, all these activities are somehow mutually exclusive in that they're not feeding into each other. They're all happening independently. And the second claim is Marx is assuming that the activity that is fundamental, which here is mode of production, is wait what yeah, it changes its character more or less independently of the others. Basically, the other characteristics that he mentioned, what social, political, intellectual life, none of that contributes to the change in mode of production. And lastly, he's claiming that changes in the character of activities called that the social, political, and intellectual life, all those changes are taking place because of the change in the mode of production. So he's saying that all these claims are part of a fundamentalist assumption, and essentially he's saying that Marx is wrong, but we'll get to that.
Okay. Yeah.
Wait, is this clear? I forgot to ask anything.
I
Um,
I hope it's clear.
Not you. I'm hoping that other people will talk. Wait, I'm gonna put it in the chat. So if you have like any, doubts or whatever, just put it in the chat or respond to what I've sent. Okay, scroll up. Okay, I'm just gonna keep reading. Oh wait, somebody's typing.
Oh,
Yes. Okay.
okay.
Um, on this interpretation, Marxism offers an easy target for criticism on each of these three accounts. To begin with, Marx did not succeed in dividing the social reality with which he was concerned into a number of mutually exclusive classes or factors. Thus, ideology, for example, refers at all times to all ideas, sometimes to normative and other ideas which are considered unscientific, and sometimes to such ideas only insofar as they serve the interests of a class. Using a still sharper knife, Georges Gerwich claims to have found 13 meanings of ideology in Marx's writings and is able to provide supporting evidence. Differences in equal magnitude can be found in Marx's use of class and of many other important concepts. Okay, so here Ollman is basically he's talking of the first claim, which is that Marx is making mutually exclusive categories such as political, social, intellectual, right? And he's saying that this is actually not true because Marx never succeeded in making any mutually exclusive classes. And he's giving two examples. One is of ideology, in which when Marx uses ideology, he's talking of the broad spectrum of ideas sometimes, and sometimes he's talking of the ideas of a particular class, of what that particular class uses to advance their interests. And another example is of class, which he says also contains multiple meanings. So the point, okay, I'll just keep reading and then I'll talk. But if Marx often uses the same expression to refer to different things, he is equally capable of using different expressions to refer to what appears to be the same thing. In the passage in his preface to the Critique of Political Economy, where he speaks of the mode of production determining the social, political, and intellectual life process in general, the same role is attributed to relations of production, forces of production, economic structure of production, of society, social existence, and the economic foundation. Not only do these expressions have different reference, but some of them appear to include in their meaning part of the reality which Marx says they determine. Thus, property relations are a system of legal claims. Property relations as a system of legal claims comes under the heading of superstructure, but they are also a component of the relations of productions which determine the superstructure. This same difficulty arises with class struggle, which constitutes part of the political life of society while also being an element in the economic structure that is said to determine political life. Such inconsistency and sloppy conceptualization has come under heavy critical fire. Okay, can you scroll up? Um, yeah, so here he's talking about how Marx is using the same expression to mean different things, and since that's possible, he must also be using different expressions to mean the same thing. Because in the part where he says that the mode of production determines so and so things, he's also giving that role to other factors such as relations of production, forces of production, etc. All these things, the ones that he's highlighted. So yeah, he basically is saying that it's not simply the mode of production that influences all these things, but it is also these things. But how can that be? Because you know he's basically giving the same meaning to different words, and uh, a problem arises when we do this, which is that, wait 1 second, can you scroll up? Yeah. So not only do these expressions have different reference, but some go down. Yeah, but some of them appear to include in their meaning part of the reality which Marx says they determine. So, a problem that arises when he's using all these different words to mean the same thing is also that the meaning that they bring is also part of the factors that they are set to determine. So essentially, he's saying that what Marx considers as determines stuff that is determining is also part of the stuff that he thinks is being determined. Okay, I think I made it a little bit confusing. Is that
Yeah,
clear?
I think
Sorry.
I think it yeah, I think that's how it is. This whole idea,
Because,
it's
I
actually
mean,
kind of confusing.
yeah, it's actually a little bit confusing. So, if I wait, oh, that's not me. Okay, so if he's basically saying that the mode of production is influencing these characteristics, and so are all these other things that are influencing these characteristics. But the meaning of all these other things, the ones that he mentioned, like the forces of production, whatever the stuff above, all those things have their meaning in the stuff that it is determining. So, social existence was one of the things that Marx said would determine social, political, and intellectual life. But social existence is social life. You get what I'm trying to say? So, the factors that become the determinants are also sometimes the determinees. Now, this is actually a fundamental concept in Marxism. It's part of the base superstructure. So he doesn't explain the base superstructure and all that. He's just assuming that the reader knows what it is. He's basically talking about how Marx represents these ideas in his work. All right. And he gives another example of property relations, which you know he's saying it's something that appears in the superstructure, but it is also something that is being determined by the base. So basically, it is part of the superstructure and the base. So how does this happen? This is what he thinks people think are confusing, because there's like, wait, I'll just ask in the chat if this. Okay, react to that, just to so that I don't have to talk about the base and the superstructure. Okay. Yeah, so the same difficulty arises with class struggle, he's saying, because class struggle is class is a part of the economic, base, but class struggle is also a part of political life, which is being determined, which is part of the superstructure. So the problem that people are identifying is that there are, oh, somebody said no. I've, okay, can,
Oh yeah. What's the doubt?
yeah, can you ask the doubt and then I'll then talk about the base superstructure? Or like put it in the chat if you're not gonna
Yeah,
ask.
or ask.
or ask. It doesn't. Yeah,
Yeah, either way, just do
So,
it.
so
Yeah,
when I
say.
read the fourth page, it says that the same difficulty arises with class struggle, which constitutes part of the political life of society, is also being an element of the economic structure that is said to be in the said to determine the political life. So
Yeah.
that is okay, but like I'm confused about the sentence that the next sentence. It is said
Oh,
to be sloppy and inconsistent. I don't see how like even the even the description about property relations too. It is said to be sloppy and inconsistent, but I don't see how that is sloppy and inconsistent. So
he's not
uh,
saying it is.
yeah.
He's
No,
saying that the author is not saying that it is sloppy or inconsistent. He's saying that the critics who are
call it.
reading Marx are saying that it is sloppy and inconsistent. And this is why they are saying it's sloppy and inconsistent. He's trying to explain the criticism that's coming towards Marx, which is basically that, you know, he confuses many things and things are not consistent. So he's not saying it.
so
Is
like
that clear?
basically he's explaining how this is more of a conscious thing by Marx by relating these two.
Yeah, 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 obviously. He's saying that it's Marx is doing this because this is his conception. Like his model of Marxism is built on a base and a superstructure, and this is how it functions. And he writes in this particular way in which words are not fixed, their meanings are constantly changing. So people, the critics, when they're reading it, they don't quite understand it because they're reading it from a common sense point of view. They take words to mean a very, a very rigid thing, but that's not true. And he's just using like the fundamentalist assumptions to clear the air. He's basically like defending Marx. So what he's saying about inconsistency and sloppiness is not his opinion. All right.
Yeah,
Okay, he's gone. Okay.
No, that's yeah, cool.
Okay. So the base superstructure thing, I think it'll be easy to explain it if Shrutin, can you like show them the, like the pictorial representation, because it's actually not complicated at all when you look at
right.
it with that.
Wait, let me
Yeah,
just Google it.
yeah. Just Google the thingy and it will show you the picture.
Okay, right. Just,
Huh. Here it is. Yeah, this one. So, Marx understands society to function in this particular way. There are concepts that are part of the base, which yeah, it's actually very clear here. So these are the stuff that are part of the base, means of production, stuff that you use to produce things, and relations of production. Basically, those involved in producing, and those things are what shape and maintain the superstructure, which is art, family, culture, religion, philosophy, law, media, politics, science, education. And these things that were just influenced by the means of production, the relations of productions, are further maintaining and shaping the base. So this is it's like a spiral, if you can picture that. The base is influencing the superstructure, and the superstructure in turn returns the influence on the base. And this, so the problem that people find with this, when Marx is writing, that Ollman is saying, is that there are concepts that's going to arise in the base, which will also arise in the superstructure. in the sense that stuff that is supposed to determine the superstructure will be present in the superstructure as being determined. So that is confusing, right? Because how can two things be there in two places? But that is the, the philosophy in Marxism, and we'll get to that. Like, actually the author does a very good job of explaining it in like the remaining part. So if this is clear, I'll keep reading.
Think another like small example is like if we take the case of the government, like we see that like bourgeois or like our current the Indian government is basically facilitating like a capitalist economy, but at the same time it exists like that because uh, like a capitalist economy exists in India. You know that it's a sort of symbiotic relationship, if you could call it that. I'm not sure if you could call it that.
Perhaps. Sure.
Okay,
So
so
you can use his example actually to make this more clear, which is
yeah,
he's saying property relations are legal claims that arise in the superstructure. So above, in the thing above the base. Okay, so property relations are part of the superstructure, which means that it is being determined by something in the base. But it is also part of the base as a concept that is part of the relations of production. So here they've given private property here, right? But does economic right always pave way for social right as it's happening? Oh, wait, he's talking about something you said, Shrutin. I don't know what he's talking
I, no, I was just making was that
about. Okay,
example
never
wrong?
mind that. It's not material. He was just giving an example.
Yeah, I wasn't making.
Okay. So, where's that person? Mino. Have you understood base and superstructure? Or should I keep saying more things? Okay, cool. So I will continue reading. It's actually gonna become um, Mama, how does this invite criticism? I don't know what that means. What is it? What are you saying?
But
Are they talking about your example?
wait, where is
Okay.
who's talking where?
I
In the
Oh,
think
chat. Never mind. I think.
okay.
Okay. So, yeah, anyway, I was saying that it's gonna get clearer as we proceed. So, if there are like minute confusions, it's probably gonna get cleared soon. So, yeah, if we accept that Marxist theory requires a separable determining factor carefully distinguished from what it is supposed to determine, we arrive at a process of elimination at productive technology, not because it satisfies all the conditions, but because it does so better than other possible factors. What is properly known as economic determinism becomes on this interpretation technological determinism, and it is in this manner that Plamenats, Popper, all these people, to name some of the more prominent representatives of this school, have understood Marxism. Okay, so their problem with a determinant also being the determinee will be makes them try to approach Marxism in a way in which there is a determinant, there is something that determines the social, political, whatever, all that stuff. So that thing has to be independent and it should not be influenced by these things in the superstructure. That is what these people, the ones that they're mentioning, the fundamentalist school of thought people want. So by a process of elimination, so they're basically getting rid of all those determinants that um, that are part of both the base and the superstructure, and they arrive at basically one thing, which is productive technology that becomes the determinant that is completely independent. And uh, yeah, that's what they're saying. I'll continue. The sustaining model of their interpretation is supplied by Marx's claim that the hand mill will the hand mill gives you society with the feudal lord, and steel mill society with the industrial capitalist. So yeah, so basically they arrive at this position because Marx once said that the hand mill will give you the feudal lord, basically feudal society, and the steel mill is giving you industrial society. So based off of that claim that Marx is making, these thinkers who are who are upset with the thing are basically saying that technology could be the only determining factor in that case that influences all the other things such as social, political, and intellectual life. Um, so I'll continue. Having reduced economic wait, is that clear? I keep forgetting to ask. Okay, just reply or whatever.
I think you should continue.
Okay, no, I saw someone typing.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Having having reduced economic structure and relations of productions to technology, the second basic assumption of Marxism, treated as fundamentalism, can hardly stand careful examination. Can the technology of any society change its character more or less independently of social, economic, and political factors it is supposed to determine? It does not require a profound knowledge of history to see that technological development is invariably a function of the level of science, the laws of a country, the policies of a regime, consumer demand, and much else. Thus, technology is obviously independent in numerous important ways on the character and changes occurring in those areas of life which it is supposed to determine, something that the fundamentalist model rules out as impossible. In leveling this kind of criticism against Marxism, then, the claim is not simply that Marx is wrong, but that he is ignorant of the elementary facts of social life. Nothing less, except perhaps dishonesty in the service of his political aims, can account for such gross misrepresentation. Alright. So, yeah, so basically they arrived, the fundamentalist groups, the people who call this fundamentalism, they arrived at technology as being the, independent determining factor. But Ollman is basically what he's doing is he's breaking down that thing and he's saying that that cannot be true because, technology does not develop independently in society. It is influenced by all the characteristics of the stuff that it was supposed to determine. Stuff like, social, political, and intellectual life. And therefore, it is not an independent determinant. And again, the same problem arises like it had earlier that something is both the determinant and the determinee. So essentially, their claim that technology is could be the determining factor is not true, and yeah, that is basically what he's saying. All right, scroll. Yeah, so we already covered two basic assumptions. The first one being of the wait, I forgot what it was, but the second one was actually, never mind, I'll keep reading and then it'll get clear. The third basic assumption of Marxism, according to this interpretation, that development in technology produces corresponding changes in all other activities and institutions, is equally open to question. Again, it is not necessary to probe very deeply into history to remark that Christianity and Roman law, to mention only the most obvious instances, have outlasted the productive technology which it is said to be responsible for their appearance. Yet, taken together, these three criticisms that the elements in Marxist systems are inconsistently defined, that what is called the economic factor is vitally affected by the factors it is supposed to determine, and that changes in the superstructure do not automatically follow upon developments in the base, make up the great bulk of the attacks leveled against Marx's materialist conception of history. So, yeah, so the third assumption was basically that the 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 things that are part of the superstructure, they're changing due to the changes in the base. But as we just looked above, the base, the fundamentalists are basically saying that the base has to independently change. Nothing from the superstructure can allow it to change. So, putting all their arguments together, it does not make any sense. And what it what we arrive at is that the criticisms leveled against Marx, that is that he is inconsistent, and that the concepts of, you know, the determinant also being in the determinant, that is like things having multiple meanings, all of those things, they don't level up against Marx ultimately when they are evaluated, as he has just done. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, if anybody else wants to say anything, they can, because I feel like I've been talking for way too long.
I think, in a way, he's trying to say that uh, the the measure, the way in which the fundamentalists are trying to prove that Marx is right in and of itself is is completely different from what Marx says.
Is saying,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So he's already mentioned this before, that they are misrepresenting what Marx is saying. Marx is saying these things, that, you know, things are recurring in both superstructure and base and all of those things, but he's saying it from a different conception, and these people are not saying it from that conception, which is why they are confused. And I think we're getting to that part. I think I forgot where it was.
Yeah, I
Let's
think so.
just keep reading.
Yeah,
Having
keep
made
reading.
such criticisms, most of the same commenters readily admit that in his concrete political and economic studies, Marx is guilty of none of the errors prefigured in the second and third assumptions of his fundamentalist theory. That is to say, when dealing with real situations, Marx does not offer the development of technology or any other version of economic factor as self generating, but as a result of a cluster of factors coming from every walk of life and from every level of social analysis. Likewise, when concerned with actual events, Marx does not treat political and cultural process as an automatic response to changes in technology. His explanation is invariably complex, and it is not always economic factors which play the leading role. However, the conclusions which is most often reached is that he is inconsistent, or that he does not know how to use his theories. In short, that Marx is a bad Marxist. Hopper has even suggested that Marx does not always take his system seriously. So yeah, he ends by saying that all these criticisms, they've not held up when they're evaluated, and further, it becomes clear that when Marx is analyzing real situations, things that are actually happening, you know, outside his theoretical framework, he ends up discarding the first and the second assumptions, which is the ones that we just saw, that the base and the superstructure cannot influence each other. The you know, the determinant factor has to be independently determining, right? So wait, what is it? Yeah, so basically he is saying that Marx is essentially not abiding by his own theory, which is not true, because they've just not understood the theory. But basically what he's saying is that when it comes to real life incidents, the factor that is determining is often determined by the, you know, the stuff that it was supposed to determine. So when Marx actually gets to the point where he is talking about real life incidents, he's moving away from his theory, is the ultimate criticism that they are giving towards Marxism. So essentially, he is wrong, he is inconsistent, his his words have different meanings, and what else? What are the? These are all the criticisms that they've brought up. So I think he spent part one and part two of this chapter just putting together the criticism that is launched against Marx's language, the way he uses words, and how complicated it can get to read it. And I guess it's in the third part where he is, you know, actually getting to the philosophy stuff. So yeah, that's it.
Uh,
Is that clear?
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Or if there's like any part that's confusing or something. I guess not. Okay.
I think, yeah, Nikhil can take the
Is my
third part. Yeah.
is my voice clear?
It's it's soft.
Soft.
What about now?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
fine.
Yeah.
An alternative conclusion is that this interpretation of Marx as fundamentalism, drawn exclusively from general theoretic statements, is erroneous. In order to take this stance, however, it must be possible to interpret in a manner compatible with interaction.
cutting off. It's like it's it's cutting off at points, your voice.
Okay, let's start again. An alternative conclusion is that this interpretation of Marx fundamentalism, drawn exclusively from general theoretical statements, is erroneous. In order to take this, however, it must be possible to interpret theoretical claims in a manner social interaction is real event. In other words, when Marx says the mode of production of material life determines the social, political, and intellectual process in general, we must try to understand this claim in a way that allows the latter group of factors to vitally affect the mode of production, in a way that removes automatic dependence of the social on the economic. We must do this because this is how Marx used his theories. Engels advised a correspondent who had asked about materialist concept to read the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte as a practical case of Marxist theory. This elementary suggestion has seldom been followed. Yeah. So just yeah. So what is that? Like he's presenting an alternative conclusion for, and it is that when Marx saying that the mode of production in real life, we must take it as the mode of production automatically determines the social, political, intellectual, or that like we must not take this as an automatic dependent. It is we must understand this way such as like when the mode of production in a particular level, it allows the other factors to influence it in a particular way. It's not an or it's not a what is it's not an automatic thing. It creates a ground for which the other factors can act. This and he's also saying that one of the places where you can see Mark actually apply it like this is in his text, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. Yeah, has everyone understood that part, or should I fill in?
I think, yeah,
Yeah. Keep
he's,
going.
yeah, you're like, I
Oh.
think, I don't know, your like voice gets cut off at like intervals.
Okay,
I don't know.
has everyone understood? So he's
Yeah.
basically saying that the mode of production uh, changing the like structure should not be seen as an automatic. It just creates a favorable ground for the superstructure to change. It's not does not happen automatically. The base does not change the superstructure. create the favorable ground for change to actually occur. And
Yeah,
that this is more explained, or this kind of analysis can be seen in the text, the 18th Brumaire of Part, but not many people take that sense, and that is a problem. Should I?
yeah, yeah. I hope everyone understood that. You can continue. Does anyone have anything to add or ask? Or okay,
Okay, I'll. Likewise, numerous statements by the elderly Engels on the role of non-economic factors are generally written off as attempts to extricate himself from an untenable position. For example, he calls it a fatuous notion that because we deny an independent historical development to various ideological spheres which play a part in, we also deny them an effect upon. Should I go on?
I think yeah, I
Think it's
think the next paragraph kind of explains it.
in this light, economic determinism, an expression Marx himself never applied to his ideas, appears to be a caricature foisted upon Marxism by readers who misread his general claims. And if economic determinism is a caricature, then so are historical and dialectical and other popular labels for his that have not originated with Marx. Essentially, these are limiting expressions which tend to foreclose on what Marx is saying before he has said it, restricting before research is done the number of possibilities inherent in any historical situation. As caricatures, they vary widely and always indicate the writer's specific limitations in coming to grips with the complex reality presented in Marx's works. Engels, particularly in correspondence after Marx's death, does mention historical materialism, though he usually sets it between quotation marks. It is, after all, someone else's expression. Like Marx, he prefers to speak of the materialist concept, a much looser construct, simply or quite simply our view of history. Yeah. So he's basically saying that any attempts to give a particular label to Marx whole worldview restricts Marx's worldview itself. Like, for example, when you label it as determinism, then you cannot explain a lot of other things like what we said, what we discussed earlier about the base not exactly automatically determining, just creating grounds for change. Yeah. Is there any are there any questions? I don't think there's anything much or anything to add.
I think in this part, he's just putting together what uh, his own argument against the criticisms that have been levied against Marx. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and like here, like when Engels says, because we deny an independent historical development, it doesn't mean that like deny an effect upon history. This is basically him like Engels criticizing the way these people criticize Marx, because of their, like as we've said like multiple times, their whole system of concepts is completely different from the way Marx sees social reality. Yeah, I think that's all I have to add.
Go on. Or
Yeah, I think we'll move on.
Yeah.
I do not believe that thinkers of stature are never inconsistent or incapable of putting their theories to work. But when such a thinker is shown practically at every turn to have strayed from its general concept, there is every likelihood that it is we who have misinterpreted it. In political theory, a case which is too well made is often no case at all against the real views of our opponent. The difficulty in exhibiting such normal caution where Marx is concerned is that it is not immediately apparent what interpretation could be given to his theoretical statements, which would also account for his workaday description. If the mode of production is said to determine the character and development of other social factors, each of which is regarded as mutually exclusive, then the self-generation of the former and the automatic response to its changes by the latter follow naturally. Yeah. So he's just saying that he's not. He's basically saying that he is not saying that any Marx cannot be wrong. Marx cannot be inconsistent. But that when such a criticism is levied against a political philosopher, he's inconsistent at all of these places, or wherever he applies his theory, he appears to be inconsistent with earlier works. Then it's probably the critics who have misinterpreted him, and not him misinterpreting his own theory. Yeah. And that's, I think. Is there anything else? Does anyone else?
I don't think he
Towards the
says
end,
much
he
here.
towards the end he says that if the mode of production is said to determine the character and development of others, each of which is regarded mutually exclusive, then the self-generation of an automatic to its changes by latter follow naturally. He's basically uh, expanding on what the mechanistic or what the deterministic, what did he call them? Fundamentalistic, yeah.
Fundamentalists.
Fundamentalist
Yeah.
interpretation of Marx, of that particular statement, that if mode of production determines the character and development, then any change in the mode of production should automatically make changes in the uh, social and political life, which is not the case, and which is not what Marx is saying. I'll just continue unless anyone has any question.
No, continue. I think it's almost done.
Yeah.
What remains to be shown, however, is that Marx treats the components in the initial equation as mutually exclusive. This is the unsupported premise on which the entire logical structure of the interpretation of Marx as fundamentalist. Rather, all the evidence is that Marx manipulates the size of his factor, alters his classificational boundaries to suit his changing purposes. An extreme instance of this, which starkly sets out the dimensions of our problem, is his claim that religion, family, state, law, morality, science, etc., are particular modes of production. What is left of the fundamentalist interpretation in the wake of this assertion? And though Engels admits that Marx's definitions are never fixed, this practice, as I have indicated, is generally cited in that Marx had to obtain consistent, mutually exclusive categories is simply taken for granted. It's basically saying that the fundamentalists, or the people who characterize Marx's theories as fundamentalists, never really cares to explain how Marx basically considers the factors as mutually exclusive. So the first two assumptions that Ollman had said that Marx makes was, the first one was that the uh, different, like the social, political, and intellectual life are all mutually independent and mutually
Mutually
exclusive.
exclusive.
But and the second one was that, what was the second one?
they're all independent from each
Yeah,
Yeah.
other. Like,
they don't change.
No, that was the first
That
one.
they change as the base changes itself. Like the determinant factor, the economic determinant is the second. That's the second criticism or second assumption that they make. Yeah, so these two, they never take any time to actually explore where Marx doesn't, because Marx just does not really make assumptions. They just look at it from their own viewpoint, or they look at the statements that Marx makes from their own viewpoint and arrive at a conclusion that must be assuming, instead of actually showing where he actually makes these assumptions. Yeah,
yeah,
I think like the last line is interesting. He's saying that they the fact that Marx had to have consistent or mutually exclusive categories is just a given for them. Like an alternative to that is not something that they think, which is the first mistake they make when they are reading. Yeah.
and
Go
also
on.
like in the middle part, he says that an instant which starkly sets out the dimensions of our problem is his claim that religion, family, state, law, morality, etc., are particular modes of production. That Marx makes a unity
Yeah.
between, this is basically a unity between the mode of production and the superstructure, that he clubs them together into calling it single mode of production.
Right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's like basically joining those two, and how, like, you know, he's not what's the word? He's not
Separating.
classifying, yeah, or separating them. Yeah, I think you can continue.
In most cases, in most cases, this aim is taken for granted because of the philosophical assumption made explicit by Acton that if there is no means of separating out social factors which interact, there is no way of testing the validity of a theory which holds that one of them is the primal causal agency. But it is just what is meant by calling one factor primary or basic or determining that is at the question here. We shall not be able to arrive at a satisfactory answer until we grasp why Marx did not clearly separate out his social factors. So here he's basically saying that Acton, I think is maybe, so that if there is no means of separating out social factors which interact, then there is no way of testing the validity of theory which holds that one of them is the primal causal agency. Here he's coming back to the same old theory of economic determinism, that the economic are the prime causal agency, and the other and it affects the other things, other social factors in a way directly, that it is that the economic factors are the prime thing. But if we are to say that economic factors are the prime causal agency, then he should be able to answer what do you mean by prime. So what is meant by calling one factor primary or determining, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
none of them we go in depth. And if until you do not explain why, what is meant by prime or what is meant by determining, you cannot actually find an answer why Marx did not separate the social factors into different things, that why Marx did not call them to be mutually exclusive.
yeah.
Does anyone does anyone have anything to add?
No, I think that explains it really well.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? No one, no one is typing in the chat, right? Because I'm not looking at the chat at all.
No, no, no. There's nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Continue.
Acton has simply turned the real problem around using what is, in effect, an ordinary language interpretation of primary to impose upon Marx a common sense conception of social reality. He is saying, given Marx understands primary in this Acton's way, he must group social phenomena into easily separable units in order that one can be held primary. One or one set of can be held to be primary. If this is Marx's basic conception, then the fundamentalist interpretation of his theories is correct and all the criticism based on it is valid. However, Marx's ambiguous practice has made an ordinary language interpretation of his key expressions at least highly dubious and suggests that until we understand his conception of social reality and consequently what he could be saying, we shall not be able to comprehend clearly what he is in fact saying. Go ahead. Yeah. So it's basically the same thing. He's just saying that even though Acton begins by saying that Marx, he gives a common sense language interpretation, the word primary, and imposes like using that normally used language or the normal meaning of primary, he forces upon Marx a common sense view of it. He forces upon Marx a reality, a view of reality that Marx does not actually view it. He is saying that given Marx understands primary in this way, that is, given Marx understands primary, what primary means in the way Acton sees it, in the way, in the common sense way, then he must group social phenomena into easily separable units in order that one can be primary. So if basically if Marx sees the world in the way Acton sees it, then it makes it then it follows that he must separate, that Marx must be separating social patterns. But the issue is that Marx is not viewing the world in from Acton's point of view. So he does not separate the social factor into different measures. So he's again coming back to the same point that if you are looking at Marx from a common sense, from an ordinary language perspective, then, or an ordinary language interpretation, then you cannot come to a complete understanding. You will arrive at several incomes, or you will arrive at, you get into economic determinism, things like that. Is that clear?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. The problem is more serious still. For if Marx often uses the same expression to refer to what we would consider different things, and as he often does, different expressions for what we think of same thing, how can we grasp what it is he is referring to on any occasion without knowing what lies behind this practice? Preferring to interpret Marx's theories in the light of how he used them, the task is to discover how he could take such liberties not only with the generally accepted classificational boundaries of subject matter, but with the boundaries he himself seemed to lay down on various occasions. I wish to understand Marx with the aid of his voluminous writing, not in spite of them. With this declaration of intent, let us return to the original formulation of the problem. Marx's words are like bats. They have meanings, according to Engels, which are not only new and unusual, but also inconsistent. This was said to result from viewing things in their relations, not as fixed but as changing. It is this conception which made it impossible for him to operate with mutually exclusive social. What then is this conception? Yeah,
think, yeah, I think that that
I
is
think we
great.
should take a conclusion to
Yeah,
the
we'll,
issues that
yeah,
we saw in the first two acts last, not spark, that the problem is more serious, that we see that Mark sees things like he uses different words for meaning to mean the same, and he also uses the same word to mean different things in context. All words or language, etc., as like he sees as viewing things in their relations, not as fixed as changing. That is, puts these words or whatever he thinks that he used, whatever expressions that he uses, he puts them in its relationship with other things, and it constantly keeps changing as his writings move on or things. So, in order to actually understand what we have to we have to fix ourselves in this conception that in whatever context that Marx operated to, so that he was able to get away with not separating mutually exclusive bracket. And what is this conception is what he'll say in the next coming paras.
yeah, I think that is the end of the first chapter. Yeah, let me just, does anyone have any questions? So, like, this whole thing is, wait, I'm just gonna stop screen sharing. This whole thing is basically the first chapter is about, I mean, especially, I think a lot of people left, but like, uh, the idea is to, I think at this point we've understood like that Marx, the way he uses language is completely radically different from the way we normally see it. And in order to understand it, we need to study what he's written, and thereby we can start to make sense of what he's trying to say. I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions or like anything
Like
to add?
this was basically an introduction to what all are the critiques of Marx and why those critiques don't make sense because they view it a box perspective. And now he'll get into what is Marx itself,
Yeah,
how Marx comes at.
I think it's also a way to look at, how you can read Marx, like as a reader, as in don't make these mistakes by, you know, looking at his terms in a, like he says, common sense perception. Try to figure out the philosophy behind why he's using terms this way, so that when we actually get to reading Marx, it's not confusing and these things are more clear. So yeah.
yeah, I think if anyone, oh wait, yeah, what was Namdu, what did he have to ask me? I think we'll talk about that and end this.
Where is
Yeah,
he? Is he here?
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
then my question is like, you told how a similar situation is happening in India, where like uh, while uh, whether a Modi or BJP or whatever is relying on religion to get
mm,
capitalist. That is what you said, or did I hear it wrong? So I
no,
was just wondering,
yeah, yeah, continue.
if, I mean, so like, does economic right always pave way for social right or vice versa? Like, yeah, that's the basic thing.
What do you mean by
Does one
social
always have
right?
to rely on social right too? Yeah.
What do you mean by social? I no, I didn't like mean like BJP, especially like that's not what I was saying. But like what I meant was like an example of the whole base superstructure thing is like the I will explain what I said and then like we go to the other thing. Like that not even India. Like I'm just talking about like like a country like India where the economy is capitalist, and at the same time the government and like every most organs of the state facilitate bourgeois interests, and like it's like it's a symbiotic relationship where they facilitate each other. That's what I was talking about, but I didn't completely understand what you mean by economic right and social right.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I meant too. Like, by social right, ഇപ്പൊ എന്താ പറയാ, like right wing politics എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോ it.
Oh, right. Oh, okay, okay.
Yes. ഞാൻ അതാ ചോദിച്ചത്. You told us a symbiotic
I was
relationship എന്നാ ചോദിച്ചത്. So
I
I
was
was,
thinking the whole time you're talking about rights,
Yeah.
as in
oh my God,
fundamental
I'm really
rights.
sorry. Oh, I should have mentioned wing. Yeah, now I realized that. Okay, I meant the right wing, not right or wrong kind of thing.
Yeah, now
Yeah.
it makes more sense. Like, yeah, economic right, leaning economic. I think, like, this is the thing, right? Like, it's like, as, yeah, it is like a symbiotic thing. Like, obviously, there are many more factors that have contributed to, like, the right wing word condition, or like, the way the right wing is structured and like what they do in India. It's not just economic, there are a lot of other things, but like this has also facilitate, like this is like both of these, the right leaning economy of India and like the right leaning government of India are like contributing to each other and affecting each other. I think that is true.
Yeah, but my concern is like if this is just endemic to our situation, just like here, uh, I mean feudalism. If the economy is capitalistic, but like it relied heavily on feudalism too, and it, in a way, uh, like work towards the interests of feudalism too. Apo like ഇവിടെ social right kind of always means that the concentration of power and power and economy lies within uh, എന്താ പറയാ റിലീജിയസ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ്സ്, അതായത് ഫണ്ടമെന്റലി ഫണ്ടമെന്റലി പവർഫുൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള റിലീജിയസ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ്സ്. അതായത് ഇപ്പൊ കാസ്റ്റ് റിലീജിയസ് വൈസ് അതെപ്പോഴും ഈ റിലീജിയസ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ്സിന്റെ കയ്യിൽ തന്നെ ഇരിക്കും എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഇസ് കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് ഹിയർ to maintain the capitalistic or feudal system. But my question is whether it is applicable everywhere. Because like ഇപ്പോൾ സ്കാൻഡിനേവിയൻ കൺട്രീസ് ഒക്കെ ഒരു പരിധി വരെ like they're capitalistic, but like they are very, like their society is kind of free. I wouldn't say free. It is kind of leaning towards
Liberal, yeah,
leftist.
liberal.
Yeah, just
For
the
that,
So
we
society.
I
I'm
have
not.
think
to
that
get into.
the difference of yeah, the context is completely different in the sense that a Scandinavian society has a homogeneous population, as in they don't have people from different countries. I mean, they do, but like not a lot. Like our the majority population is homogeneous. So like there are all these like tiny factors and they'll all factor into each other. So the fact that like a large group of their people are of the same race will make it easier for them in some ways to become more liberal because they don't have as many conflicts racially speaking. So that's not true for like every other country, or in this case we're talking about India. So I think you're like focusing very much on like this, like I don't know what, some kind of detail, and I forgot what this discussion was about. Was this about the base superstructure thing?
No, no, no. It's not about the. No. I, see, again, it's just a discussion about the details. ഞാൻ ആ സുഖം ചോദിച്ച കാര്യത്തിലായിരുന്നു ഞാൻ ചോദിച്ചത്. അതാ ഞാൻ ആദ്യം
Yeah, Nikhil was saying
explain
something.
ചെയ്തത്.
Yeah, and
Okay.
then
അല്ല, ഞാൻ ഇതാണ് ചോദിച്ചത്. അതായത് ഇഫ് ഇറ്റ് ഓൾവേസ് എ സിംബയോട്ടിക് റിലേഷൻഷിപ്പ്, ഡസ് ഓൾവേസ് വൺ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂട്ട് ടു ദി അതർ എന്നുള്ളൊരു സംഭവമായിരുന്നു ചോദിച്ചത്. Yeah.
that is the. Oh wait, you say you've been trying to say something, Nikhil.
No,
Yeah,
no, that's
Nikhil.
just about it.
Not you, dude. Not the
Nikhil.
Nikhil.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not.
It's okay. Para.
Mhm. Yes.
Dude left.
Debbie, is he here?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay, fine. So he said that
Still can't hear you.
you actually look at what is going on currently in Scandinavia and Nordic countries, there is a high anti-immigrant sentiment being flared up. Like Zayara said, they had they have a home population, but now they see the inflow of immigrants from the Arab world, a threat to their civilization, way of life, and the government did that to cut down social factors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
austerity
So,
programs. Yeah,
yeah, Nandu, the thing is, this is the Marxist, uh, what do you call it, system. Okay, the fact that they're symbiotic. I don't know, like,
I think symbiotic is the
symbiotic.
right
Who said
word.
that?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just use that for the
in
example.
the
Like,
sense, it's mutually dependent. It is. That's what it is. As in, like, the change in one thing will invariantly cause a change in the other, and so on. And because they're all related in some way, internally or externally, then there is like an overall change in the system, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's like the basic thing. So whether or not it always happens, it's like, you'll have to really assess the situation and like figure it out yourself, because you know
Yes.
that's what brains are for.
100%. Hmm.
okay, yeah, I think we can end this session there. Yeah,
All
we'll.
right.
I mean, since you're here, like, I guess we're reading wage labor and capital for next week. No, not all of it,
Yeah.
like as much as you can. Okay,
See,
Yeah.
എന്താണ് വായിച്ചത്? I didn't hear you.
wage labor and cap. I'll put the link in like the
Okay. Cool, cool, cool.
channel and like in the group. Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay then. Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you to everyone who's left already. Yeah, bye.
Bye bye.
Okay.
Okay.